with other patients and waiting and planning to get on, but we're going to get started. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Brian Bushman and his presentation using behavioral chaining in clinical practice. Dr. Bushman comes to us from Texas, where he attended UT Austin for undergrad and did his doctoral work at Utah State, and has been with Intermountain, I believe, since 2007 or 8 for a while, and so knows our system well. So with that, Brian, please take it away.
All right, thanks, Denise. Appreciate it. Well, first of all, thank you so much for spending time with me for this next hour. I'm going to cram a lot in. This is really a 2-hour presentation that I'm going to jam into about an hour. But I'm excited to present it. So for those of you, most of you are probably familiar with dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. And for those of you familiar with the model, there is a behavioral chaining group that people attend, which just helps them identify antecedents that culminate in some negative behaviors that they may demonstrate. And so part of the purpose of those groups is to basically help the patient understand how they get to those negative behaviors, whether it's overeating or using alcohol or cutting or something else like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present a model that I've used with my patients in clinical practice. It's not the only way to do it, I admit, but it's a way that has been helpful for some of my patients, and so that's why I'd like to share it. So let's talk a little bit about the promise and problem of doing this kind of behavioral chaining. First of all, the advantages of doing it with your patients is that it breaks down their experience so that they can understand how they got to doing some of the negative behaviors that they're doing, especially when they don't know. They're like, I yelled at my husband and I'm not even sure what came out of me. And so it can be useful for a variety of presenting problems, not just for what we typically think of with DBT, which would be like suicidal behavior or cutting. This could be true for binge eating. It could be true for drug or alcohol use, pornography use, for a lot of different things. I think it's also an advantage for the clinician, because if you do chaining enough with people, you get an understanding of what are the things that culminate in those negative self-defeating behaviors so that you can know where to focus your treatment. But the problems with doing this type of chaining approach is it can be helpful, but how do you apply it when you don't have a chaining group that you can send people to? It's also pretty difficult to, at least I found difficult to keep track of all the acronyms in DBT. So I really try to streamline the process a little bit. All right, so this is an overview of what we're going to try to do today. First, attendees will be able to identify both the internal and external quote unquote chain of events that happen that culminate in some self-defeating behaviors for the patient. Now, I use the acronym TRIALS, TRIALS. The second goal is that you'll be able to identify which types of patients will benefit from the approach and which may not. The third is that you'll be able to observe a role play of me doing this so that you get a better sense of it. What you'll need in order to do this is you'll need a trials handout, which I think was included in your packet material. It's a front and back handout. Also, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to share the role play in the presentation. I've had hit and miss luck with that, so if you need to find it, there's a link right there to bring it up. But we're going to try to make sure that everybody gets a chance to look at it together. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put it on the link just in case, just in case things don't work. Everybody should now have it in your inbox. You may need to hit that to open it up in a separate browser, but I'm going to try to load it in the presentation. Hold off your questions until the end, if you don't mind, and just make sure your mics are off. But I will try to open up some time for questions at the end, but I want to be respectful for everybody's time. All right, so here's some limitations. When do you not want to use this approach? I'm focusing on the second goal today, right now. So it's not going to be useful if you've got a patient with a full cluster B criteria are met. In other words, if they need DBT, send them to DBT. Don't use my approach as a substitute for DBT for people that need DBT. Patients should also be in at least the contemplative stage of change. for reasons that are going to become pretty obvious soon. I mean, if they're still in the pre-contemplative stage of change, you're better off using motivational interviewing until they get to that point. You also don't want to use this approach until you've got two things. One, a good relationship formed with the patient, and second, that you make those goals that are collaborative with the patient. I almost never do this until about session 3 or 4 at the very earliest. I also want to emphasize that even though the process that I'm going to share is a very component-based process, chaining should explain what's going on with the patient, but I don't want to confine the patient. So in other words, if there's a piece that doesn't work for the patient, get rid of it. Don't feel constrained by the process. And then of course, there are certain patients that are not going to do well with this if they have full criteria for dissociative identity disorder, like they lose track of time, if they have autism, thought disorders, really low IQ or low emotional intelligence, they can't identify any emotions. And if they're not over the age of 13, those are some patients that this probably won't work as well for. Some disclaimers. I can send you a lit review if you need it. Just email me and I'll send it to you, but we don't have a lot of time, so I won't get stuck there. This didn't come out of my head totally. I want to give credit for obviously DBT and Marshall Linehan's work. You're going to notice also some of the stuff I borrow from Dan Siegel and his work with interpersonal neurobiology. I use a lot of Stephen Hayes's stuff related to ACT, and Buddhism is the foundation of it. All the handouts that I'm going to do are at my website that I'll show you at the end. And I do want to do a disclaimer that it was found in a book that I published a couple of years ago. You or your patients do not have to purchase this book. All the information is free, but I did want to be upfront about that. Okay, so let's talk about background. Oops, skipped ahead there. There we go. Okay, in his book, Buddha Brain by Rick Hanson and his colleagues, he talks about the metaphor of the rose. Now, according to Hanson and really Buddhism, life presents us with both the pleasant and the aversive. Now, when we get the pleasant, he compares it to like a rose that smells really good. And so what do we do with things that are pleasant? Well, sometimes we cling to them. It's like if we have a rose in our hand, we wrap our hands very carefully around the stem of the rose to avoid the thorns, and we want to hold on to the pleasant or the positive. And sometimes we hold on a little too tightly. So it's like me with a second bowl of ice cream. I know I shouldn't have the second bowl of ice cream, but I cling to it. I hold on to it because I want to re-experience that pleasure. So that's one thing that happens that creates some suffering in our lives, is we cling to the positive. Now, what about the negative, or what about the aversive? Well, in this case, he compares it to like a decaying rose. Now, if a rose is decaying and it looks horrible and smells horrible, our first impulse many times, not always, is to avoid or to push it away. We treat it like it's the opposer of a opposing football team that's about to tackle us. We push away with all of our might and we say, la, 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 I'm not listening, as we're trying to push it away. Now, we can only do that for so long, consistent with what Steve Hayes and ACT says. We can only do that for so long until suddenly we fuse. We put that stinky rose right up to our face and we get stuck in it. And soon we can't see anything else. So these three impulses, to cling to the positive, or if it's negative, to push away the negative, or get stuck in the negative or fused with the negative, those are the three impulses that we have that create some self-defeating behaviors. And it explains a lot of the diagnoses, not all, but a lot of the diagnoses we see in the DSM. But to understand this with patients helps us focus on the process whereby their lives become unmanageable, rather than getting really fixated on a diagnosis, which has some limitations. So how do we get out of these impulses? Well, this is where the mindfulness stuff comes in. Now, the metaphor that I use the most is comparing the mind to a river. If we think of a river and our mind being like a river, I can step into a river at 1 second, then step out, and then step into the same river. But am I really stepping into the same river? Well, yes and no. It is the same river, but it's different that 1 second later. Just like I, Brian Bushman, am different by the end of this presentation. I won't be the same Brian Bushman. I'll have different thoughts, different feelings. And our mind is like that. It's constantly flowing with different mental events. And so, as a way to help patients understand this, I'll use the mind river meditation. Some of you are probably using variants of this, where I'll have patients imagine that they are sitting beside a river and they're just breathing and they're noticing their river and they're noticing leaves on the top of their river, like in the fall that you see pictured here. Now, each leaf represents a different internal mental event. It could be an impulse to cling or to avoid or diffuse, but it could be a feeling, it could be a thought, it could be a memory, it could be a sensation. And so, what we want to do, and this is what mindfulness teaches, is to just observe whatever's coming up. And instead of doing this, this, or this, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get patients to do this. This is why the Buddha always has an open palm whenever you see statues of him, is because in this approach, what I can do is I have some distance, appropriate distance from my leaf, my mental event, but I'm not stuck in it, but I'm not pushing it away either. We're trying to find the middle path, and the middle path is this palms up approach. That's what we mean by acceptance. And I always like to make that clear because I don't want patients to think acceptance means getting over something or thinking that you deserve something, because it doesn't mean that. It also means that we're just developing this non-judgmental awareness. As Rainier Maria Rilke said, no feeling is final. Because if we can really accept that and understand that, then we're not as impulsive, and that doesn't lead us into suffering, doesn't lead us into some of the self-defeating behaviors. So that's a little background. Okay, so what do we mean when we talk about chaining? Let's go back to that. Now, I use the acronym of trials. The first, there's six components. And again, get rid of the components if they don't work. First component is triggers. These are stimuli in the environment that trigger either a positive or a negative charge inside of us. And this also includes any vulnerability factors like us not sleeping well or being overscheduled or being stressed. We're all more likely to act on our triggers when we're really vulnerable. But we want to track with the patient what are the things that are happening in the environment that are triggering us. Next, what we have, the second component is R for reactions. Now, this is not reaction in the sense of behaviors that the patient is doing. We're not there yet. I'm talking about reactions that automatically happen inside of us. Now, I use Dan Siegel's work here. He uses the acronym of SIFT, S-I-F-T. S stands for sensations. I stands for images or pictures we get in our head. These, by the way, can be memories of the past or things that might happen in the future. F stands for feelings, and T stands for thoughts, judgments. Now, it's important to know that SIFT can be either have a negative or a positive charge. We think of them as always being a negative charge, but they can be positive. For instance, sensations that are positive are like sexual excitement. Positive images could be memories of getting an award that happened to me a while ago. Positive feelings can be feelings of excitement or contentment. And positive feelings could be thoughts like, well, she deserved it, or about time this happened, that Schadenfreude kind of thoughts. We don't think of those as positive, but we can cling to them pretty tightly. But my point is that all SIFT can have either a positive or a negative charge to it. Positive meaning wanting to cling, negative wanting to do this or wanting to do this. And each one of these things is a different leaf on the river. But those are some of the internal reactions. Now, after we have the internal reactions, we have an impulse. It turns out that we as human beings are not designed by evolution to just sit and mindfully, with a palms up attitude, notice our internal SIFT. Instead, what we want to do is we are designed to act, because those of our forebears that acted on positive or negative SIFT tended to reproduce and tended to not get eaten by tigers. And so that means that we want to do something with these SIFT. And so this is where those primary impulses of craving, avoiding, or fusing come in. And of course, you can have more than one at a time, and that's what makes us so complicated. Now, this is our first or initial impulse, but not necessarily the last one to come along. So what do we have so far? We've got a trigger in the environment, then we've got some internal reactions that just automatically happen, and then we want to do something with them. We want to do this, we want to do this, or we want to do this. We may not do them, but that's kind of what's going on inside. All right, so far what I've talked about is the hardware of what evolution has put into us. Now we come to the software. All of us were raised in cultures and in families, and in these cultures and families, we learned certain shoulds, things that we should or should not do. And so this is where the learning that we had when we were kids or from our culture at large starts to come into play. So we get stirred up by our hardware and then our software chimes in, okay? So this is where the hardware and the software can clash and the whole system can crash, right? So a lot of the times this takes the form of kind of if-then statements, what Aaron Beck would have called conditional assumptions. So when and you're going to see me demonstrate this in a minute, but when I'm doing this with patients, what I'll do is I'll repeat back to them the different SIFT that they're having and ask them which one of them is pulling them into the river the most, which sensation, image, feeling, thought. And then I'll say, I want you to complete the following sentence with the first thing that you can think of. When I was younger, if I felt blah, 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 whatever SIFT they mentioned pulls them into the river the most, then I should, pregnant pause. And they usually complete the sentence with some kind of should that they downloaded from their culture or from their family of origin. And then I quickly ask them, well, how does that make sense based on your youth, right? Because I don't want to pathologize it. My point is here is we've got a trigger and then we've got some internal stuff and then our culture picks up. And sometimes these two things don't make good bedfellows. They kind of conflict with one another. Now, what do we do with that conflict? Well, sometimes this is where we rationalize to ourselves, okay? We all lie to ourselves. We all BS ourselves sometimes. And our rationalizations serve one of two purposes. They either serve to confirm what we already know we're going to do. So for instance, if I really want to eat that second bowl of ice cream, and by the way, I use that one a lot, so I hope that's an okay analogy. If I want to eat that second bowl of ice cream, then I tell myself, well, I can always work out more later. I know I'm lying to myself, but it's my confirmation bias. Or sometimes those rationalizations, they resolve that hardware-software conflict inside of us, that cognitive dissonance. So it ends the internal conflict. Brief story, I was at a conference for DBT of all things, and the conference presenter was in front of the group, and this woman, who I'd never met before, came and sat next to me. It was kind of like an assigned seating thing. I said hi to her, she said hi to me, and that was pretty much it. And we went through the conference, and the presenter basically said, as a way to demonstrate mindfulness, said, turn to the person on your left, and what you need to do is in complete silence, you just need to stare at this other person and say nothing. Do nothing, say nothing, just have eye contact and be aware of the SIFT that is coming up inside of you. You can't do anything, can't speak, you can't fake a seizure, nothing. You just got to look at this person. And it turns out that this woman who I was sitting next to was very, very attractive. All right, so here's what happened inside of me as best I can remember it. I'm looking at this woman because I have to. And I start having all these pleasurable SIFT because she's very attractive. And my initial impulse is, yay! And then my cultural programming kicks in, okay? Because I'm a married man and I shouldn't like looking at this other woman that I don't know. And so I went from yay to wait a minute to, oh crap, what does this mean about me? And so inside my mind, I was just doing boom, 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 all over the place for like 5 minutes straight. Horrible experience, right? But if I would have been able to leave the situation, I wasn't able to because the presenter didn't allow people to leave. If I would have been able to, I probably would have made a rationalization of, oh, I need to go to the bathroom or I need to do something. I would have done some kind of rationalization to end the conflict. Look, if your brain is doing this, no wonder people want to cut. It's a good way to hone the mind, right? But the point is we usually do some kind of rationalization first before our self-defeating behavior. The last part, number 6, is the self-defeating behavior itself. I used to call these self-destructive behaviors. I thought that sounded a little too heavy-handed. So a behavior, what do we know if a behavior is self-defeating? Well, here's how I define it. A behavior is self-defeating if it violates one of three things. And I use the acronym of POWs. And I hope nobody thinks I'm making light of something serious, but a behavior is self-defeating if it holds hostage your POWs. What do I mean? P, your principles, the better angels of your nature, so to speak. O, your long-term outcomes, not short-term outcomes, because short-term outcomes means I should just eat the ice cream. Long-term outcomes. And W, what works, to use what Marshall Linehan says. Those are the POWs that get interfered with. And so the types of behaviors that we do, there are three categories, but four types. Craving, remember that, becomes clinging. We hold on and we eat the second bowl of ice cream. Avoidance becomes escaping. We leave situations either mentally or physically, even though they aren't noxious. We just feel like they are. And fusion, boom, the decayed rose in front of my face. We either act in, which is kind of like we dump on ourselves, or we act out. We overcompensate, we get aggressive with other people. And these self-defeating behaviors tend to become another source of suffering. This is what the Buddhists would call karma. In other words, the environment reacts to our reaction. So if I am acting out by blaming my wife, she's not going to probably, even though she loves me, she's not going to look at me and say, wow, you've just had a hard day. She's going to react to my reaction. And then that becomes a new form or potentially a new trigger. So putting it all together, here's what we got. We got T is the trigger. R are the reactions, the internal things that happen inside. A are the automatic control strategies. The I is the impulses, this. A is the if-then stuff we learned when we were kids. L are the rationalizations we tell ourselves to do what we already please or to end the conflict. And the S are the self-defeating behaviors, and you can see that it can circle back up and become a new trigger. And people can go around and around and around on that until they wind up in our office. So I always like to emphasize to patients, and you'll see this, I always like to emphasize that these first four things, triggers, reactions, impulses, or automatic control strategies, they occur automatically. People aren't wanting to do this. They just automatically happen. So it's just about being aware of them, not shaming yourself for having them. Now, when we get to the self-lies or the self-defeating behaviors, this is where we have to do some replacement stuff, because this is really where our free will does start to come in. We have a little bit more choice here, but we want to do it in a replacement way. Now, let's go back up, because I've kind of gotten into the minutia and the details. Let's take a 20,000 view of this first, though. Why are we doing this? Well, the old adage is, in order to get out of a hole, you have to first stop digging, right? Trials represents the mental and behavioral process. It represents the shovel we use to dig ourselves deeper and higher. And so trials helps provide the patient with this hopefully with a coherent narrative to understand their experience, and helps us as clinicians know where we need to maybe intervene a little bit better. That's why we're doing it. One last thing is if it helps the clinician understand the process, because I usually do the trials process with patients at least 3 times on 3 separate sessions, it helps me find the common weak links in the chain. If it's the common trigger that's showing up, I might focus on stimulus control. If it's reactions or impulses that tend to pull them into their river the most, I might do a lot of mindfulness and acceptance-based strategies around those particular leaves, okay? If it's certain messages they got when childhood, I might want to do more transactional analysis or do internal family systems, for those of you familiar with that model. Or I do a lot of EMDR or brain spotting with whatever those if-then statements are. If it's common rationalizations, there's some similarities there. I might do more ACT or CBT based on your preference. And if they want to begin with the self-defeating behaviors, then I might do more skill building. So if you see some patterns over time, it might give you an idea of where you need to intercede. And one of the things I like about the chaining model is you're not tied to just DBT. You can do a lot of different types of modalities of therapy. And I think that this works with a lot of different orientations. All right. But how do we do this? How do we put all this together? Well, first, you got to build the relationship and identify the goals before using this. I can't emphasize that enough. But the first time you do that with the patients, you're going to need about 20 or 30 minutes to educate, do some psychoeducation for the first time. I use a whiteboard, and you'll see this in the example that I'm going to give you. So in the example that we're going to do right now, and I sent out a link before, and I'm going to send it out again just in case somebody arrived late. I'm going to try to include this in the presentation, but if it doesn't work, you can hit that link and you'll go to it. But while you're following along, you might want to pull out that trials handout that you got with your packet and go through the demo. Now, you're going to notice something very important. I start with my colleague, Julie Gowdy-Nice, who was nice enough to volunteer for this. I start with the end, which means I start with the self-defeating behavior. And I start out with something small that she's willing to use. So I start with the self-defeating behavior and I talk about the rationalizations that she uses, and then I go back to what triggered it. Sometimes that's a helpful way to present it to patients so that we begin with the end in mind. Sometimes if patients want to start with the trigger, that's fine, but it can be helpful to start with the self-defeating behavior first. And you also you're going to notice that I do some self-disclosure here with my affection for ice cream. You might want to have something like that on hand just to normalize the idea that we all do self-defeating behaviors. And what we're going to do is we're going to watch this for about 20 minutes, take some notes, and then we'll come back and we'll kind of debrief about it. So let me go ahead and set that up and let's see if it works. If the sound does not come across, please put that in and text me and we'll do something else. Okay, hope that makes sense. All right, give me a second here. Okay. We all do things that we. Thanks so much for meeting me. I really appreciate it. Okay, what I want to do is I want to talk with you a little bit about. You may need to turn up your sound, but can you hear me? We all have. We all do things that we know better, but we do it anyhow. Quick self-disclosure for me, it's like eating ice cream. I know I shouldn't have the second bowl, but I do it anyhow, right? And so most of us, we have certain self-defeating things that we do. Now, there are three kinds of self-defeating behaviors. The first one is kind of like my ice cream example. Let's say that my hand represents something pleasant that I like. I might cling to it. I might want to re-experience it, even though I probably should let it go. Okay? So that could be something that would be positive, like that feeling of eating ice cream. But other times, my hand actually represents pain, represents something I don't like, a certain feelings, certain memories, thoughts. And what ends up happening is sometimes when I have these things, I get fused. It's like it comes right to my face and I can't see around it, right? I'm stuck in those negative things. And sometimes instead of being stuck, I'll like push it away. Like it's an opposing tackler of a football team. I'll like push it away. But I can only do that for so long until I suddenly get fused again, right? And so we can go back and forth, right? So let's talk about the self-defeating habits that we all have. So sometimes we cling to stuff that's pleasurable, but sometimes we avoid things we don't like, even though they're not really harmful in the present, but it feels like they are. And then at other times when we're fused, we'll either lash in, which is really blame ourselves for stuff and do some self-harmful behaviors, or we'll lash out. We'll get irritable with somebody, we'll have a stressful day and we'll kind of take it out on people. So does that make sense how I'm describing that? Okay, so we all have these things, and part of what we want to do is we want to understand what's the process that leads us to that place so we can end that pattern. That's really what we're doing today. So what I'd like for you to do is I want you to think of, just in the last week, something that kind of fell into one of those categories that felt self-defeating in a way. And what I'm going to do is I'll take a few notes, but at the end you'll have the notes to see kind of what it is for you. So, and by the way, I want you to start off with something that's kind of mild to moderate, not something severe, just something that has been an issue for you for a little bit. And let's see if we can work through it. Is that okay? Yeah. right. So what would think of your last week? What's something that would kind of feel self-defeating? You do it even though you know that it may not turn out too well.
Yeah, I heard it called revenge scrolling recently.
Okay.
And I don't do like the Facebook thing, but I pull up my phone in bed,
Uh-huh.
and I'm playing my games. And oh look, it's now an hour past bedtime.
Right.
Um,
Right.
The only
Okay.
one that's gonna suffer from this is me when I'm cranky tomorrow morning.
Right. Now the revenge scrolling, does it feel like you're kind of distracting yourself from something, or is it more like you're stuck?
I think it's more like it's a pleasant thing.
Oh,
Like
okay.
it's fun.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
So it's more of a cleaning thing.
Yeah, but
Okay.
like I could probably do with less of it or more sleep.
Okay. Okay. So maybe doing the scrolling thing is kind of like your ice cream kind
Yeah.
of thing. Okay. All right. And you said before that it will sometimes not turn out well. Like how does it become self-defeating? What does it do to work against you?
Um, well, I mean, it gets in the way of sleep,
Sure.
but then I also am like, like, why am I doing this? Like, I just said last night I'm gonna get to bed on time
Right.
because I was so tired and cranky.
Mm-hmm.
And yet here I am again, and it's half an hour past bedtime already.
Yeah.
Haven't put my phone down.
Right. Right. So it sounds like maybe in two ways. One is it interferes with sleep, and the other one is it interferes with what you said you were going to do. So it's kind of like a violation of your like principles or how you.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I've been there. Now, most of the time when I do some kind of self-defeating behavior, I usually rationalize it first. I know it's not going to work out well, but it's like me with the ice cream. I kind of say, I'll work out tomorrow, or, there's some kind of self-lie that I tell myself. You know, um, for you, when you do some scrolling, like what is that rationalization?
The kids are finally in bed. I have not had any time to myself all day. Um, I deserve to have whatever I need playing my little video game.
Okay, yeah, yeah, I've been there before. Okay, so that's a good example. Any other rationalizations, or is that the main one?
Um, it'll only be like I'll check it really fast. Like it'll only be 15 minutes.
It'll only be 15 minutes. Okay. Okay, now, an important question to ask here is with those rationalizations, it'll only be 15 minutes, or I deserve it. Do you know it's a rationalization at the time, or are you kind of actually believing the spin?
I would say sometimes I know, but sometimes I believe it. Like, oh yeah, like I just need 15. Like, I'll be fine.
Right,
like, 15
right, right,
minutes. It's a little break.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
sometimes I believe it's true.
Okay, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Okay, all right, good. Okay, so that's good explanation. Now let's go back to the very beginning of what might trigger the scrolling thing. Like for me, for the ice cream, like if I've had a really hard day or something like that, I've worked really hard, I haven't slept well the night before. So when we think about triggers, this could be anything from fighting with spouses to not sleeping well to having a hard day at work. Let's go to the beginning. If you had to make a guess, what do you think would be the triggering thing that would set up the scrolling?
Um, I probably do it more on work days. So like my work day is such like I go to work, I take care of the kids, and then it's generally less than an hour before my bedtime by the
Yeah.
time everything's all said and done. So it's like basically I've met everybody else's needs,
Mm-hmm.
and this is my first chance all day to really meet my needs.
First chance to breathe.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah, okay. Okay, good. Any other environmental things that could be going on that would be contributing to that?
Maybe just like doing other things doesn't always work out because like I picked up running.
Oh, okay.
But when it's late at night and it's like it's dark, it's not cold anymore.
Yeah.
But if it seems like running doesn't seem like an option at that
Yeah.
moment, then okay, well, I only have 15 minutes, so I can just pull out my game and do that instead.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe a little bit of disappointment not getting to something that you wanted to do.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I'll put that down. Okay. So whenever something like this triggers us, what happens is we have an automatic reaction inside of us. We're not trying to, we just have a reaction. And we kind of think about, there's an acronym we use, SIFT. S stands for sensations. I stands for images or pictures we get in our head. F stands for feelings, and T stands for thoughts. Now, you may not have all of those, but what I want to do is I want to sift your brain for a minute and kind of identify what are those internal reactions that you might be having that you haven't asked for, you just get, right? Sometimes it's easier to start with the F, the feeling part of it. When you're feeling, if I'm there with you, because I want to feel it with you, you're there, it's your first chance, you're kind of maybe disappointed you haven't ran. What's the feeling that you're having at that moment?
I would say frustrated.
Yeah, okay. Frustrated feeling. Any other feelings underneath that?
Maybe some disappointment, but I think it's mostly frustrated.
Okay, I'll put those both down because they can come in pairs or even more, but frustrated is the stronger one.
Yeah.
And where do you feel that frustration the most in your body? If we bring it with us right now and we experiencing it together, I want to feel it alongside of you. What's the frustration? Where do you notice it right now?
Like I think in like my shoulders and my fists. Like I wanna.
Shoulders and fists. Okay, yeah, I can feel that too. I can kind of get there.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else as we're there?
Maybe like a little bit with it, like facial expression.
Facial in the face.
Yeah.
Kind of hold that. Okay. Good. Okay, so you hold some tension in your shoulders and your fists, maybe a little bit in your face. Okay, so if we take that feeling and that sensation, are there any images or pictures that come? Now, this could be of memories of the past where you felt like that you're rehearsing, or it could be things that might happen in the future that you don't want to have happen. Some people are visual, some people aren't. What kind of images pop into your brain?
Like an image of my kids, like, okay, mom.
Yeah, you can see that image, their face, mom,
Yeah, like,
mom.
Demands, just.
Demands. Okay, good. That's great. Anything else that's here right now with us as we're looking at this?
Kind of an image of myself like going into work and being tired and be like, okay, here we go again.
Here we go again, yeah. Now, that's interesting that you mentioned that because now I want to shift to thoughts, right? Let's go and I want to feel it with you, that tension in your shoulders, your face, feelings of frustration, maybe some images of your kids. If we could put that into words, what would be the thought? What is that feeling saying about you?
Everybody else needs my time, and I don't get my time.
Yeah. And if that's true, you don't get your time, what does that feel like it means about you?
I'm not as important.
That's important. Okay, that's a good example. Any other ones along there? Okay, great. So what I want to do is I'm going to read this back to you, and I want you to tell me which one of these is kind of pulling you the most, right? Because certain reactions we have, they pull us. Okay, so we've got feelings in your sensations in your shoulders, your fists, your face. We've got those images of your kids, mom. Oh, here we go again, right? Feelings of being frustrated or disappointed, and then thoughts like, I'm not as important. Which one of those tends to pull at you the most?
Like think of my kids and the demands.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe those images.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's true for a lot of people. Okay. So, look, one of the things that we as human beings, when we have these kind of internal reactions, we didn't ask for them, but we've got to do something with them. We have an impulse, and this is where we either want to avoid, we fuse, or we kind of cling if it's something pleasant. When you're in that image of your kids, mom, is it more of a, since it's not a pleasant thing, it sounds like, is it more of a pushing away thing, or is it more of a fuse thing for you?
That's kind of hard to pinpoint.
Yeah.
I guess because it kind of feels like both. Like it's hard to kind of get rid of it, but it's also like, no, I'm done with that.
Right.
I want to avoid that.
Right, you want to avoid that feeling. And that's a good answer, by the way. It doesn't have to fit into like one category. So there's a part of it that feels like there is a pushing away, and there's a part of it that there's a little bit of a stuck. Can you speak to the pushing away part?
So it's like, well, they're asleep at this point. They aren't going to come make demands. Like, I don't want to have to think about that because it's going to take away from my actual free time.
Yeah, yeah. And then the stuck part?
It feels like it happens so often, just
Yeah.
like it's hard to get away from that. Like, it'll probably happen tomorrow. It happened yesterday.
Hard to get away when
Yeah.
you're kind of stuck in it. Sure. Okay, good. So now what I want to do, one last thing, you've done great here. What I want to do is I want to figure out the bridge between all these internal reactions and kind of the scrolling stuff. Now, we all kind of grew up in different cultures and environments, and sometimes we learned things in our childhood about how to live and how to survive. So sometimes I call these automatic control strategies. We just determine that if I feel a certain way, then I should do blah, 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 right? Now, you mentioned that image of your kids kind of wanting to do some demands on you was pretty powerful. So don't force anything, but let it come up. When you were younger, if you felt like you were demanded, then what does it feel like you should do?
Run away.
I should run away. Okay, that came up automatically. Okay, so if I have demands, then I should run away.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other if-thens that kind of come up for you?
If I want it to happen, I have to do it myself.
Then I should do it myself. Okay. And how did that make sense when you were younger? You don't have to go into too much detail if you don't want to, but from your culture or background, maybe that made sense. Both of those things. How did it make sense for you growing up? That if you're going to do it, you got to do it yourself, and if people are demanding, you got to get out of there.
I'm the oldest, so I'm used to being in charge.
Yeah.
And you don't ask people younger than you to do things. Like, you just take care of it.
It's kind of on you. Yeah. And did that work for you when you were younger, or not so much?
I think it worked in places.
In places. Okay, that's a good way to say it. And when we're done with this, we'll kind of go back and explore that a little bit, because I think that's important. But let's go to kind of what brought us to the scrolling behavior. Okay? So what we've got here is, you notice I've got on the whiteboard here, we've got triggers. Triggers is kind of all those other things you were talking about, of like all these demands that are being placed on you. And then you have these reactions, sensations including in your shoulders and in your fists, images of your kids like mom, 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 right? That was really powerful. Feelings of frustrations and thoughts. Let's see, we've got a couple of thoughts here. You know, the I'm not as important. Maybe here we go again. That may be another thought. Now, you didn't ask for any of these. They just happen, right? And because you get stuck in these, you have both that fusion impulse and that pushing away. And there's this conflict. You're kind of doing this, right? And this brings up some old stuff that maybe you learned, that if you're feeling like demanded, then you need either run away or do it all yourself, right? Run away or do it all yourself. And that makes sense given your history, given some things that we'll kind of go into a little bit more later. But as a way to end that conflict, then we rationalize to ourselves and we say, hey, this is my only shot, I might as well do it. And so the self-defeating behavior is we kind of adopt maybe a clinging type of thing where we kind of do the scrolling, even though in our mind we're kind of like, hey, this isn't going to end very well. Now, first of all, did I get anything wrong in this kind of explanation?
Yeah, that'll make sense.
Okay. Now, I know that's really wordy, but let's talk about why we're doing this. You know, it's commonly said that before you can get out of a hole, you have to stop digging. Okay, this is how we dig. Okay? All right, so we all do this to some extent, and a lot of information here, but we can summarize it using one word. T, R, I, A, L, S. These are your trials. These are the things that happen. This is the process that happens inside of you that kind of culminates in maybe a negative behavior. And then the problem is that sometimes when we do a self-defeating behavior, it starts up a new trigger, right? So like you don't sleep well, and then you have some maybe disappointment with yourself the next day, and then you want to avoid that, and then that brings up maybe that oldest child kind of thing inside of you, and then there can be some more rationalizations, and then you might do some different kind of self-defeating behaviors, and then we can wash, rinse, repeat again and again and again. So part of why we're doing this is to understand the process so that we can slow it down and we can stop the process before we keep going through loops, never-ending loops, right? So let's talk about what we do with these. So with triggers, what we really want to do is we just want to be aware. We want to be aware so we can avoid them at sometimes when possible, okay? With these next three, reactions, impulses, and automatic control strategies, like I said before, these aren't your fault. They automatically happen. They automatically happen. So what we want is we want to use some acceptance. This is where we're going to do some mindfulness. You may have heard about mindfulness, which is just noticing these things without getting stuck in them, okay? Now, really, the first choice that we get is all the way down here, okay? You know, what we have to do with these kind of rationalizations and these self-defeating behaviors is then we have to, without giving ourselves a hard time, we have to do some replace, okay? So what we're going to do to help. Okay, I'm sorry about the abrupt ending to that thing. It turns out that my phone did not have enough space, but there was only like 30 seconds left, and I'll tell you how that ended. But that gives you kind of a sample of a way of doing it. I want to talk about the process here a little bit. So you notice that I started out by normalizing the digging process that we all go through with the self-disclosure with my ice cream example. And you also notice that I began with the end and started small. Now, interestingly, I kind of got it wrong. I originally thought the revenge scrolling was a negative. It was acting in or, behavior, but it was actually a clinging behavior for her. It was her ice cream. So, hey, I got it wrong. Now, one way that was pretty wordy on my part because I kind of did the whole thing like she didn't have any exposure to any of this. You might want to explore doing the mind river metaphor with your patients first before doing this because it kind of cuts down on the amount of psychoeducation you have to do with them. A couple other things to notice about this example is when you're doing the reactions, you'll notice that a lot of my language was about, I want to feel this with you or alongside of you. So that way you're experiencing it with them and it doesn't seem quite as intellectualized. You'll also notice that when I was doing the reactions, I started with the F, feeling. What was the feeling that came up? And was there anything underneath it? Because I really want to make sure to get all the feelings on the table. And then I went to S, sensations. Where do you feel this frustration in your body? And for her, it was here and in her shoulders and a tightness in her face. And then afterwards, I moved to images and thoughts. The idea is if we could take all of this stuff and put it into words, what would it say about you? And she said, that I forgot exactly how she said it, but I'm not important enough, something like that. And then what I did is I read back over the SIFT. I said, here's your sensations, images, feelings, thoughts. Anything wrong? Did I get that wrong? They usually don't correct me. But then I asked, which part pulls at you the most? And interestingly, I thought she was going to say it was the thought of I'm not important enough. But it turns out it was that image of her kids clamoring, saying, Mom, Mom, Mom. Now, that's important because when we get to A, the automatic control strategies, then we want to complete the sentence with that. When I was younger, if I experienced being demanded upon, which is what that image was, then I should, and she completed it with run away. And then we continued to kind of process that and we came up with some other if-thens and talked about how that made sense for her growing up as the oldest. And that'll give me an opportunity to go back and explore that a little bit more if I want to later. And then you saw how at the end there, before my phone rudely cut out, I emphasize how triggers, reactions, impulses, and automatic controls, those are automatic. And what our goal is with triggers is we can do some stimulus control, although you don't say it that way to the patient. But with the reactions, impulses, and automatic controls, it's more about awareness. And And what you didn't see at the end of that role play was at the end, I used the whiteboard to say, is this right? And then which one do you want to begin with in this shoveling process that represents trials? Which one is most important to begin with? Because I do want to collaborate with the patient, and I think that might be one way to do that. So I'm going to send a copy with, you're going to get a CE for joining today. And in that material, I'll give you a copy of what I was actually writing down with Julie if you want to compare notes. If we had more time, I would do it side by side with you, but you will get that. Not that my way is the gold standard, but it sometimes it's helpful to have that kind of comparison. So let me do this. What I want to do is, we only have about 8 minutes left. So I'm gonna summarize and then open up for some questions. There's 4 different phases of treatment you can use this in. Now, the first phase of treatment, you don't use it in. It's just relationship building. This is at least the first 3 sessions, if not more. Here, what I would do is just rule out poor matches that won't work with, use motivational interviewing, and maybe introduce mindfulness and the mind river metaphor. And I'll show you where I have that if anybody wants to use it. But before I move on to the next part of treatment, I want to ask myself, do I have a good understanding of what the patient would perceive as a self-defeating behavior? Not what I think, but what they think. Once I'm in the assessment phase, which is about more or less the next 3 sessions, I explain the trials in the exact same way you saw I did it with Julie. I give them a copy of what I've written down at the end, and I use it as a way to collaborate. And I see for the next 3 sessions what holds over time. Where are the consistent problems showing up? Is it about the triggers? Is it about a certain reaction? Or is it about something else? And then in the tracking phase, which is the next 3 sessions, I explain the importance of journaling. I give them the trials handout to do on their own. I tell them to skip things if they don't fit, because I want to fit the tool for the job and not the job for the tool. But then that way they can start doing some of the chaining on their own. And then lastly, what I want to do is I want to do some, next is I'll do some replacement phase. I have a different handout for that called Accept that I'll show you, which emphasizes repetition and kind of habit formation. So a couple of things to troubleshoot here. What if they don't move to actually doing the journaling? Honestly, I talk to people about journaling, but a lot of them just don't do it. And so should we bother if that's the case? Well, when I was doing chaining in DBT groups, a lot of those patients had been through chaining groups like 4 or 5 times and believed in DBT, but they didn't do it either. But I still did it anyhow. So I do believe it still can be helpful because it helps us understand the process. It helps them come up with this coherent narrative about how they get to there. And it also can help us with agenda setting, because after you do this the first time, it doesn't take that much. Soon you can just briefly go through trials at the first 5 or 10 minutes of the session and say, where are you most stuck? Where do you want to break the pattern? Once they get habitualized to it or they understand it. So let me just show you a couple of quick things, then I'm going to open it up for some questions. Let's see here. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing. This is the part that I was worried that was going to happen, where I wasn't going to be able to quickly go through things, but give me just 1 second. Okay. So you should see on your screen, it's that, oops, not you. Okay, I'm gonna get out of that. Okay, so all this stuff is for free on my website, drbrianbushman.com. Here's what I got for you. If you go to the videos tab at the top, there's this cool little 4-minute video that introduces the importance of mindfulness. It's really well done, and it's just 4 minutes long. So I have patients watch that. And then these 2 are free downloads. One is an introduction to the Mind River meditation, where I just talk for 5 minutes and explain SIFT and what they're going to be doing. It's like instructions. They only have to listen to it once or twice. And then the second one is the Mind River meditation itself that lasts about 13 minutes. Listen to it yourself before patients listen to it to make sure it's a good fit. But that's something that they can listen to on an ongoing basis to practice getting out of their river. And then the other part is the handouts here. The trials journal is right there for a free download. And then the Accept journal is right there for a free download. So you have that information there, again, if you need it. And then last thing before we go to questions. Chapters 1 and 2 of the book are for free on there. They explain pain, suffering, those 3 impulses. If patients are readers, if they're not, then don't worry about it. There's my email if you want the lit review. And for CE evaluation, somebody's going to be emailing you, having you complete a survey about today and giving you all these handouts. So if you complete that, you'll get 1 CEU for attending today. So questions, comments, concerns. I actually ended with 5 minutes left. Last time it was like right at 1 o'clock. So I feel pretty good about myself right now because I usually cram way more in than I have time to do. So what questions can I answer for anybody out there that's still with me?
Just a note that you're welcome to enter your questions into the chat, or you can unmute yourself on your end and ask directly.
Ah, thank you. Okay. Any questions, concerns, anything else like that that I can answer then? And what I might do is just then I'll really quickly just share my screen unless anybody has something for our last 2 minutes here, because I want to be respectful of people's time. I will share kind of the things that I wrote down when I was with Julie, unless somebody has a specific question for me. Okay, I'm going to take that as a no, so I'm just going to share this real quick of kind of what I was doing with Julie. If I can figure out how to do it. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this is it. So this is what I did with her. The triggering thing was meeting everybody else's needs. This was the first chance she had to breathe. Some vulnerability factors. She was disappointed by not being able to do something she wanted to do. I think that added to it. Her sensations were tension in her shoulders, fists, and face. The images, this was the thing that pulled her into the river the most, which is why the eye is circled. Kids saying mom, 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 being really demanding. Feelings of frustration and disappointment. Frustrated was the higher emotion. Thoughts of I'm not as important. She had 2 different conflicting impulses. One is they're asleep. I don't want them, doing the avoidance because they're asleep. And the other one is being fused. By the way, you can ignore this part at the bottom about safety, belonging, independence, competency. I think that just, if I could do it over again, I would delete that part because I think it just complicates it needlessly. And then the other one that I'll share is the backside here. Give me 1 second. Yeah, it's kind of a pain when you have to stop sharing and then you have to reshare. So give me 1 minute here. Okay, then there's this one. These are the if-thens. If I have demands, then I should run away. If I want something, then I should do it myself. Okay, and it was kind of made sense given her environment because oldest, she was in charge and it worked in places. And then she got into some rationalizations where she thinks I deserve to have it, and she both believed and didn't believe it, which is why the yes and no are circled, or it will only be 15 minutes. And again, both of those are circled. And then it was actually revenge scrolling was a clinging behavior that got in the way of her principles because of, she told herself this before that it wouldn't be a problem, and her long-term outcomes because then she's not able to sleep. So that was just kind of an overview there in case anybody is following along. Again, my way isn't the only way, but it is something to be thinking about if helpful. Anyhow, any other last concerns, questions, or comments before we wrap up? Again, I want to end on time and be respectful to everybody. Anything else? Okay, cool. I'm assuming silence is golden, but I want credit for having time for questions at the end, because I'm glad I was able to do that. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and joining, and I really do appreciate it. You'll get that email soon from, who is it, Aaron, that's going to send her the email?
It'll be Tanya Schaefer with the clinical program that'll be reaching out to you with the link to the evaluation, and that's really all that's required as far as receiving the credit. Likewise, I will be sending out the link to this recording, as well as posting it to the MHI homepage for future reference. So we're trying to do that with a lot of these peer learning webinars, so that our colleagues that weren't able to join us today or last week will still have the ability to review the material.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Brian, and great job today with so effectively and concisely providing a tremendous amount of information in such a short amount of time. So thank you, Brian, and thank you to our participants.
Thanks so much, everybody. And Aaron, can you send me a copy of that link too?
Yes, I will.
Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.